Conservatism is a party which never conserves anything. Its history has been that it demurs to each aggression of the Progressive Party and aims to save its credit by a respectable amount of growling, but always acquiesces at the last in the innovation. What was the resisted novelty of yesterday is today one of the accepted principles of conservatism. It is now conservative only in affecting to resist the next innovation, which will tomorrow be forced upon its timidity and will be succeeded by some third revolution, to be denounced and then adopted in its turn. American conservatism is merely the shadow that follows radicalism as it moves forward towards perdition. It remains behind it but never retards it, and always advances near its leader. This pretended salt hath utterly lost its savor. Wherewith shall it be salted? Its impotency is not hard indeed to explain. It is worthless because it is the conservatism of expediency only, and not of sturdy principle. It intends to risk nothing serious for the sake of the truth, and has no idea of being guilty of the folly of martyrdom. It always, when about to enter a protest, very blandly informs the wild beast whose path it essays to stop that its bark is worse than its bite, and that it only means to save its manner by enacting its decent role of resistance. The only practical purpose which it now subserves in American politics is to give enough exercise to radicalism to keep it in the wind, and to prevent its becoming pursy and lazy from having nothing to whip. No doubt, after a few years, when women's suffrage shall have become an accomplished fact, conservatism will tacitly admit it into its creed, and thenceforward plume itself upon its wise firmness in opposing with similar weapons the extreme of baby suffrage. And when that too shall have been won, it will be heard declaring that the integrity of the American Constitution requires at least the refusal of suffrage to assess. There it will assume with great dignity its final position. Robert Louis Dabney in Women's Rights Women, 1871. The King's Hall podcast exists to make self-ruled men who rule well and win the world. So, gentlemen, in today's episode, we are taking the Acts of Boniface to the green groves and high places. Brian, in this one, we're going after something I think is near and dear to a lot of actually Christian people's hearts.
Yeah, that's right.
And what is that?
Well, it's cuckold conservatism.
You said that. Yeah, I said. You said that.
It's this lame duck conservatism. It's one of the answers that, in light of even some of the things we've been talking about in the last episodes, you might be tempted to think, how do we fix this? Well, maybe we jump on board with this kind of conservatism. And we're going to say, no, Eric, it will not fix the problem.
That's right. I think Doug Wilson was fond of saying that conservatism in general is a bit like a parachute without cords on it. So you pull the ripcord and then nothing.
The Dabney quote, it's the shadow that follows radicalism.
That's right.
Oh.
And in a lot of senses, conservatism ends up being sort of a parasitic thing on leftist ideology. So we're going to unpack that today. One of the places I wanted to start, gentlemen, was with a definition of what is conservatism, at least in the sense of political theory. What are we talking about? Well, generally in the past, especially the last 100, 150 years, conservatism has been thought to include things like limited government, the rule of law, again, typically an emphasis on the U.S. Constitution. We have things like fiscal responsibility, free markets, strong families, local institutions, and promotion of traditional moral codes that have been a hallmark of Western Christendom. Now, one of the sort of godfathers of conservative ideology was Russell Kirk. And so I went to their website, the Kirk Center, to see what their definition for conservatism was. And Kirk defined it in 10 components. So I want to unpack those and kind of get you guys' thoughts on them as we do so. So number one, there is an enduring moral order. This is what conservatism believes. Right? Number one, he says, we believe in an enduring moral order. Number two, there is adherence to custom, convention, and continuity. Number three, there is distrust of novelty. And this would include philosophy, ideology, things like this. Number four, prudence, by which he means aiming at longevity in our actions. So we might say, intergenerational, looking at things and saying, what's going to last? And then number five, he's got a diversity of decentralized power centers and public institutions, including family and church. Number six, a distrust of man because of, quote, innate grave faults. Number 7, freedom and property are closely linked. Okay. Number 8, conservatives favor voluntary community over forced collectivism. Number 9, the state exists to restrain evil. And number 10, change has its proper place within this realm of conserving things. But it's interesting as we look at this list, and this is kind of the first question I want to ask you guys. We wouldn't necessarily disagree with those, but they seem to be just stripped down Enlightenment style ideas. Like they were once Christian ideas. You could find all of these, particularly number 9, the state exists to restrain evil. We think of Romans 13.
Right.
But it seems like this list is missing something important by stripping it of its Christianity.
Yeah, what was number 1 again? About the moral...
There is an enduring moral order.
There is an enduring moral order.
Could be Buddhism.
It just exists.
We don't know what it is.
Yeah, that's
a brute fact.
Yeah, I mean that's what you're talking about with Enlightenment sort of philosophy, is that it's not rooted. It's not grounded in anything. The list is great. If you're coming at it from a Christian worldview and you presuppose like, oh, I know what morality is, and I know what evil is, and I know what the state's responsibility is, but that's not the conservatism that we're talking about. We're talking about a conservatism that, like Dabney said, is a shadow of, what did he say?
Yeah, it's a shadow that follows radicalism to perdition, on its way to perdition. Is what he said.
I know Eric offline had said conservatism is like a parasite to the progressive movement.
Yeah.
Similarly, so you adopt the morals of this progressive movement in just a time past.
It's reactionary.
In history, yeah. So maybe 60 years ago, you take the morals from the progressives then, and you adopt them and say like, whoa, we need to slow down. So that's inherently the problem with the list.
Well, I want to ask Brian this. To me, it's this Enlightenment knee-jerk reaction to do what John Locke did, which was take all these robust biblical principles of Christendom, utterly strip them bare, turn them into something secular, and then put that forward to the world as though it was going to be potent.
Right.
And I want to ask, like, what is wrong with that instinct?
Yeah, the problem is that list would function tremendously, for the most part, as a first, round of bricks in building the wall sitting on top of a foundation.
Like Christendom.
Right, like Christendom, or the absolute pre-existence, the presupposition of God's existence, of God's vision, of this moral order being God's moral order, and not just God in a Jeffersonian deistic sort of sense, but Yahweh, the covenant God who rules and made all things, right? So if you have instead, and like to your point about Locke and many other moral thinkers who could even be classed among conservatives in some way, or could be claimed by conservatives in some way, many of them took the house that Christianity had built and they shoved a big forklift under it and they jacked it up and they moved it and they set it down on top of a bog, and it just slowly sinks into dilapidation because they thought they could have the house without the foundation. And the problem with that is that as soon as you move the house off the foundation, it falls over eventually. I mean, you cannot sustain a real Christian conservatism, any conservatism worth having, without the foundation sitting underneath it.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely huge. And I don't want to point to an essay, which I found very helpful as we were addressing this topic. This is from 1991, and it is by Samuel Francis. It's titled Beautiful Losers, The Failure of American Conservatism. Ooh. So what he describes is that post-World War II, you really had the rise of the managerial elite, and something happened with what he calls the old right of conservatism. Sort of the Russell Kirk conservatism started to die. And a big portion of this was because they were trying to really build consensus with elite leftists. That became kind of the sole aim of the quote-unquote conservative movement, which he says in the 1970s really became neoconservatism.
Interesting.
So we're going to unpack this in the show in a little bit. We'll talk about people like Ben Shapiro and some others who are prominent today, but these guys really fall at best in the camp of neoconservatism. Now, what Francis says about the movement is that its goals are not conceptually distinct from those of progressivism and liberalism. So the fundamental tenets of this neoconservatism, again, you'll notice, are the same as leftist progressivism, maybe just addressed a little differently, but they're fundamentally the same. And this is the foundation problem that you were bringing up earlier. So he says these fundamental tenets are socially engineered equality, They'll talk about things like equality of economic opportunity.
Yeah.
But it's still based on equity, diversion, inclusivity, stuff like that, equality. Number 2, globalism. So even your Republican Party today is embracing globalism. George W. Bush was a huge proponent of globalism. Yeah. Open borders, right? Anybody who doesn't believe in open borders is obviously a racist. They talk about jettisoning Christian morality. They talk about America as this giant melting pot. We all seem to be supporting either party, and I'm not including us individually, but conservative and liberal. Everyone seems to be supporting abortion on demand. Even today, people who you think wouldn't. Everybody seems to be supporting a bloated New Deal-style welfare state.
Right.
So even the conservatives have realized that to keep the hooks in middle America, we're going to keep ramping up what we do with healthcare, for example. We all parties are believing in rampant government spending and inflation, and then finally material gratification as a central ideal for defining the good life. So this is Samuel Francis saying, look, neoconservatives are fundamentally the same as leftists.
Yeah.
In 1991.
Wow.
So I just want to ask you guys, do you agree with his assessment of what has become the Republican Party? And as you're thinking about that question, it reminds me of Aaron Wrenn. He did a series on his podcast called Why the Republican Party Hates Your Guts. And it was really good because he was basically saying to conservatives, every election cycle, the Republicans say, hey, we're you.
Yeah.
We represent you. And then they go and they do things in office that are completely contradictory to everything that middle America believes in.
Mm.
So again, do you think that Samuel Francis is right in characterizing conservatives this way?
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. And one of the best barometers that you can test this theory is just follow the money.
Yeah.
So follow the money. If there's a surplus, say a program has been cut, there's a surplus in the budget, do they say, you know what? Let's give it back to the people? No, they're gonna spend it. They're definitely gonna spend it.
Yeah.
Republicans, just like Democrats, when somebody's trying to pass a bill, they're jockeying to get their own pet projects done, to attach their own fat pork to the bill, just like anybody else. And so, the inflation thing is a big tell, not giving back money or cutting taxes or actually having some sort of balanced budget. The continuing bloat of the government is just further evidence that they're actually all on the same team.
Well, even somebody that we today tend to think of as like, oh, he was the, sort of like the pillar of conservatism was Ronald Reagan. The federal government and spending in the U.S., I think, increased under him more than like anybody since.
Yeah.
Now, that may be different now.
He also signed the first no-fault divorce law in the U.S. as the governor of California.
Yes.
Yeah.
That was Reagan.
And even this year, as Dan was mentioning, 2 states I can think of, it's an interesting comparison. 2 states had massive surpluses, among others.
Yeah.
One of the biggest surpluses in the U.S. was California.
Yeah.
The other was Alabama. Which one do you think? Alabama is tried and true red state Republican.
Mm-hmm.
California is the exact opposite. Which one do you think gave money back to its people with the surplus?
California.
California.
Oh, I'm disgusted.
So, and this is what you run into across America is your perception of the Republican and conservative party may not be attached to reality.
Yeah, it's like, would you like grape-colored progressivism or apple-colored progressivism? We've got a blue and we've got a red. Which, like you get the hard candy at the dollar store, and it's got a bunch of different colors. But when you start eating it, you're like, this is one flavor. There's not different flavors. it's the you pull the blue lever, you pull the red lever, and I'm actually not saying, because I think there's a way I could be misunderstood here. I'm actually not saying that, vote Democrat, vote Republican. It's exactly the same.
No.
Because tactically it's different. And there are real significant differences between the platform of the Democrats and Republicans. And so, for example, I think it'd be a church discipline issue for somebody to openly vote for Democrats, virtually without exception. Whereas I think it's possible, given our 2-party state, to vote Republican with a clean conscience. But we have to recognize as we do so that voting Republican isn't going to fix a dang thing, to put it mildly.
I think it's important to understand the question. We're comparing conservatism to authentic, robust building of Christendom, not to the Democratic Party.
Right.
So that
Exactly.
is a phenomenal point.
Exactly.
The other thing I want to ask as we compare these things, conservatism as it is today versus the building of Christendom, is just to ask the question, like, how would those things be different? So what we're espousing in this show for building Christendom, I think if people have listened to the show, I don't think you would walk away thinking, wow, these are your run-of-the-mill political conservatives like you would find at the Daily Wire.
Yeah, you're in like the Young Republicans Club or whatever,
Yeah.
and now you're a leader in that. No, definitely not. So what are we saying is the solution? That's the question.
Yeah.
Part of it is the approach of politics, the approach to politics. And the church has been obviously missing, but even just individual Christians, their approach, and conservatives, and the political ideology, the philosophy that people employ in order to make change is a top-down mentality, fundamentally. We got to get the right guy in office. That's the first thing that people think. And Christendom, this is a big project, right? It takes generations for this project. One president in 2 terms, 8 years, isn't going to change, like you said, a dang thing.
No.
Getting the right local politicians can make some difference. But that's not the solution. The solution of building Christendom is a bottom-up strategy. It starts with people repenting.
Yeah.
It starts with people repenting. There's a reason that we have wicked rulers and wicked representation. It's because we are a wicked people.
Yeah.
And it is a judgment on us. I'm also not saying don't be involved in the political process because it doesn't matter at all, because it's not going to make any difference. And I can just say, recent memory, going to the gas pumps, things were different under Trump than they are under Joe Biden. There is a difference. It does make a difference.
Yeah.
Because one fundamentally hates you, absolutely hates you, and one probably is using you.
And actually, to your point, it's funny because the left is actually, in some ways, a better picture of the kind of principles that conservatives should be operating under. Meaning that they're playing for keeps and they're trying to enforce a totalizing worldview and ethical system upon everybody, right? They're not saying this kind of libertarian fever dream where they're saying, like, if you don't like abortion, don't get one. If you don't like gay marriage, don't get one. No, as we've been demonstrating in this season, and Carl Trueman's book on the rise and triumph of the modern self is a great case in point for this with the sexuality that we talked about in a previous episode. They are aiming not to tolerate you. They're aiming to convert the world to their religion, right? They're playing a post-millennial sort of game. And so in some ways, the conservatives, as the shadow that follows radicalism to perdition, is just being this reactionary yippy-nippy dog on the heels of this Chad left that is basically saying, you will love the gays. You will love transgenderism. You will love having your kids in public school learning all of this, or we will put you in prison.
Right. You will get the jab, or else you can't buy and sell. You must give a pinch of incense to the rainbow flag, or you're going to get fired.
And in that sense, they get it. They get the way the world works, is that it is winner take all. I mean, that's the way the world works. And biblical realities would establish true freedom. I'm also not denying that, but I'm saying this play for keeps, even the freedom that a Christian society would be aiming to deploy and protect would be a Christian freedom with Christian ends and Christian guardrails that would prevent demonic ideologies from infiltrating society and bringing death with them.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's interesting, Brian, because you didn't see my notes.
No, I didn't. I'm probably going way ahead of you.
No, literally, you anticipated the very next question.
Ooh.
Which I want to continue to unpack.
Yeah.
And I think it's a phenomenal one. This just shows how our minds, gentlemen.
We're on the same wavelength, guys.
3 galaxy brains just melded together.
This is the
we
King's
just
Hall.
Spend a lot of time together.
That's right.
We are the same person.
We are one.
For the project of this season to be successful, the project of seeing a new Christendom built, there will need to be thousands and thousands of Christian men and women who are equipped to stand for the truth of Scripture against the errors of both the liberal church and the pagan culture. This is one reason we're so glad to be partnering with our sponsor for this season, Reformation Heritage Books. Reformation Heritage Books offers a large selection of helpful and theologically rigorous resources on everything from biblical theology to history to blue-collar family discipleship, the type of library and resources that could make the kind of men and women I just described, grounded in the rich heritage of the Reformed faith. We'd like to highlight one resource in particular, their Family Worship Bible Guide, that presents rich devotional thoughts on all 1,189 chapters of the Bible, including searching questions to promote conversation and to help you in leading your family in such a way as to say with Joshua, "As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." Tap the link in the description of this episode to pick one up today.
The question that I had, Brian, and this is exactly what you're talking about. Why has the left been so successful since, post World War II?
Yeah.
And you can think about people like Marcuse, Freud, Marx, Darwin, all radically successful.
Mm-hmm.
So why was the leftist movement successful where conservatism was not? And I want to throw my 2 cents in here and then get your thoughts. See if they're the same. Here's my point. It's exactly what you've been saying, really. The left is fundamentally at its core post-mill. They have an optimistic plan for the future.
Yeah.
They have a clear vision. And they have a grassroots strategy that is aggressive and focused on your children and education. The left has been successful because it set its sight on institutions, on children and education, and then it put in the blood, sweat, and tears to slowly creep into those organizations and grow. So everything's leaven.
Yeah.
Right? We have that choice. Like, we can be leaven or we can not be leaven. I think what the right did was they just said, because of maybe pietism and some other things, which we can unpack, we're just going to give that away.
And, even just a small point here, even with the instinct of the right that went wrong, it was an instinct born of a vestigial kind of Christianity still. Because what they wanted to do was say, left, people that disagree with us, we're not trying to force you at gunpoint to agree with us. We're trying to establish freedom for us to disagree. We're not trying to be Islamofascists where we're at the sword point saying worship Christ or die. But what they did was they misunderstood the nature of the game. And so when they said, we want to establish freedom for all, they began to view these institutional battlegrounds as basically neutral. So they thought, public schools are basically this neutral thing where you learn the neutral body of facts every citizen needs to know. And then when they go home or to their church or to their Boy Scouts or their para-church organizations, you sprinkle in this, I've often compared it's like the seasoning packet in the ramen. They would say, all the institutions are just the noodles. And then, when you get home, mom and dad will open you the little Christianity season pack and season it over there. And the left instead was like, no, you don't understand. We're going to make the public schools apostles of our totalizing worldview. So you don't get what we're doing here. We're not saying we want to peacefully coexist. We're saying we want to conquer the world and win everything and convert your children to our religion.
Have you ever been punched in the jejunum?
Yeah, that's the core difference. The left was playing for keeps.
Yeah.
And they're being aggressive like that.
Yep.
And the whole time the right is thinking, man, how do we get the left to like us?
Exactly. How can we persuade them? How can we show them that we're really nice? How can we show them that we don't hate them? And all these things are true. You can be biblically kind and not want to kill them and be biblically tolerant, like in the sense that we aren't Muslims. We're not converting the world at sword point. We do believe in the doctrine of conversion and that culture follows conversion. But what we failed to get is this error of modern radical two kingdoms kind of error. It's adjacent to that. It's this stupid idea that there's this common kingdom that is the noodles, and you can sprinkle in the flavoring packet. But the reality is, we're all the noodles is we're fighting over the noodles. Everything is.
And the reality is, what happens? What's the net result of all of this? The left just swallows everything alive.
Yeah, in this Gramscian slow rot approach, where they say. And another thing we need to talk about, I'm going to just put a pin in this because we'll probably talk about it in a minute. We need to talk about how liberals understand art and media in that side of culture and conservatives don't. But
so, Eric, one of the most successful ways or tactics that the left has employed in order to move the needle within organizations and within the slow march through the institutions is that they're willing to talk about taboos. And they're willing to take the extremist position. Like even to the point where it's almost like a meme. You remember when AOC had sponsored the new Green Deal?
Yeah.
And it was like, we're going to ban cows because of their farts, because of methane gas. Like even to the point of just being absolutely ridiculous. So they're pushing the narrative for the homosexual movement back when there was just a very, very, very small minority of the population that was actually homosexual, and they were able to force the issue. Saul Alinsky talks about this in his Rules for Radicals, is that you push through until it becomes reality.
Yeah.
Where if you were to ask the average person on the street some years ago, how much of the population do you think is homosexual? They would overblow it by 5, 6x,
At least,
They'd say, 10%?
Yeah, 10%. No, it's
like 1.
Yeah. Well, I don't know what it is now, but back then,
it's changing now.
When they're really pushing this issue and this taboo, that's what they did, is they used this tactic of talking about the taboos. And so tying this back to the conservative movement, Eric, where have they failed? Why has that not happened with the conservatives?
Yeah, I think what conservatives have done, even before the Overton window existed, right? R.L. Dabney has seen it back then. He says the reason conservatives are going to get crushed, that's actually about feminism, by the way.
Yeah, right.
And he said feminism is going to ruin America. And the reason that we get crushed is because we're trying to play the middler. And taking a message and watering it down and being the guy in the middle who kind of tries to appease everybody, the only thing that achieves is that everybody hates you. So this is one of the interesting things. Again, in the earlier article I mentioned, the essay that I mentioned on why conservatives always lose, he points out, he says, the irony of all of it is that the left ends up hating conservatives, and so does middle America. They become the most hated group in America. The other way to look at this, Dan, is you can look at advertising strategy. I remember reading this about Colin Kaepernick, but people all think, oh, Kaepernick, especially middle America, they think, oh, that was a disaster for Nike. No, they made billions off of that. Well, why was it so successful? Because they employed Saul Alinsky's strategy of polarity. Saul said, find the enemy, oppose it, and polarize it. Right? So the whole point is polarity draws people. The reason Donald Trump was attractive to so many people is because he was polarizing.
Oh, yeah.
People are drawn to messages like that, and particularly you can look at the manosphere, the intellectual dark web. Why is Jordan Peterson, even though he's saying a lot of things that seem pretty normal, what is the appeal of that to so many people? He's talking about taboo subjects. Joe Rogan will talk about the things you're not allowed to talk about.
Yeah.
And so people love him for that. Even some of his takes are trash. But I think what we have to learn from it as conservatives is something that, actually, this is Rhett Koppel on Twitter, had responded to something I said about conservatism.
Yeah.
Because I said the conservative urge to start think tanks, periodicals, and educational institutions is worthless if all it does over time is seed those entities to leftist progressives. And Rhett had this response, which I think was great. He said, which means we need institutions that are distinctively adversarial in nature to leftism.
That's right.
So he's talking about polarity. We do not need compromisers. We do not need consensus builders or uniters. No. Also, routine and regular assessments that look at these institutions for liberal drift.
Yeah.
So I think the problem is you ought to know the difference between, you should not be trying to build consensus with wolves.
Right. This is the strategy of Christ and his kingdom, is that Christ didn't come to unite the Pharisees and the common man, or he didn't even come to adopt the Pharisees' polarity of Rome or the Zealots' polarity of Rome versus Israel and Israeli freedom. Jesus came with his kingdom to invade, conquer, colonize, transform, and totally win every square inch of human existence with his kingdom. That's what he came to do. And it was with the attitude of, if you are not on my side, then you are against me. There's no sort of cozy, neutral middle ground where you can just sort of exist, and you had to react to Jesus' program one way or the other, either with rejection or acceptance. That's the point, is that like Donald Trump, it's funny to look at him as an example, because he played for keeps. And it seems like, I think my evaluation of his principle is that Donald Trump's principle, his thing that he wanted to divide the world around, was, I want people to love Donald Trump. That was what he was aiming to do, right? That's Donald Trump's greatest operating principle, is he wants people to love him and think he's great. I think that's his principle. And so because of that, he's totally clear about that in almost everything he does.
Yeah.
And so, of course, he will either wildly succeed in that or utterly and spectacularly fail, but either one is a success for him, because if people hate him, he succeeded in getting them to react to him and treat him as important and give him this gravity. And then all of a sudden, like, you remember the primaries? Nobody thought Trump was going to win. Everyone was laughing at it.
Except Ann Coulter.
And then why did he win? Because he got everybody, including his opponents, to be his advertisers.
Well, and this is a principle, again, in marketing. We're talking about Colin Kaepernick. It would be better. You want to be loved or hated. You don't want to be ignored.
Exactly.
Right. And so even when he was being hated, he was drawing attention. The left cared significantly about Donald Trump. I mean,
yeah,
I think the Trump derangement syndrome, they really did become obsessed.
Oh, yeah.
With Orange Man.
Yeah. And we've even in our little corner of the world seen this here at this church in Ogden, where like we're relative nobodies and, you know, not that important in the scheme of things, not well known really, and beyond this very, very tiny niche sort of world of the King's Hall podcast and post-millennial Christianity and patriarchy and some of those things.
We are the niche of the niche.
Yeah, we're the niche of the niche. But I tell you guys, there are whole Twitter accounts that exist from people that I think are just on Twitter to hate follow me and Eric and Dan. I mean, like,
I think I've been excommunicated.
You've been like, even to the point where recently Dan and I were talking about this tweet. Like we will find tweets or Facebook posts of Eric or my Twitter where people are screenshotting and just roasting us somewhere else.
I didn't even
out
know
of
what's
earshot.
happening.
And every time I find it, I just chuckle because I'm like, you guys are really, thank you for helping us win.
Yeah.
Thank you, because you're understanding the project we're pushing, which is a project of polarity, not neutrality.
Yeah, I think it's huge. So one of the things that, Brian, you mentioned earlier, which is next on my list, that the left is good at capitalizing in the polarity game, but also understanding is media and entertainment. So media, entertainment, I saw Top Gun this week, utterly blown away. One of the things I walked away with, great film, by the way, even James White's going to see it twice. He said he loved it.
Wow.
I'm with him. But it made me leave thinking, wow, media is so powerful.
Yeah.
It's so powerful. So why, gentlemen, has the left been so good at this, and why do conservatives generally, they suck at telling stories?
Again, because the right has been, it's been reactionary. And when you're reactionary, you tend to deal on the level of arguments and logic, where the left says, we're going to do this. We're going to stop the farting cows. The farting cows are the problem. We got to get rid of the cows. They're farting too much. The earth is warming. We got stop. You will eat the bug. You will live in the pod. And the right all of a sudden devotes like 6 months to writing articles analyzing methane production. And they're like, actually, volcanoes produce. And like then they get out their actuarial tables and their Excel spreadsheets, and all they're doing is reactioning on a logical level to an argument that was never meant to be all that logical in the first place. Whereas the left understands, once again, it's going to always come back to this principle that they are playing for a totalizing victory of every part of what it means to be a human being. And so they understand that one of the most potent things you can do to win culturally is to win people's hearts. And how do you win people's hearts? Well, it's not through actuarial tables and Excel spreadsheets. It's through stories, it's through media, it's through art, it's through beauty, it's through transcendence. It's by associating your agenda in the hearts of people with beauty and glory, which is why they don't show fecal matter smeared all over somebody's genitalia in promoting sodomy. Instead, they will show you beautiful music behind a slightly slowed down, 4K video of two gay men holding hands with the sunset behind them. And they'll tell a story on a sitcom where the gay couple overwhelms the odds of the conservative hating Bible bigots and play the clip. Just play the clip.
You are gay.
Instead of saying, what I'm so this is why, think about something like the gay marriage photography issue, like, okay, Christian photographer, take pictures of my wedding. And some Christians I've heard go like, it's not a sin to photograph a gay wedding because, photography is not a sin. Seeing somebody who is gay is not a sin.
We're trying to make something heinous look beautiful, though.
That's the problem. Yeah. That's what we're not getting when we make those kind of arguments.
A photographer is telling a story.
Yeah, and that's their whole task culturally, is to display as beautiful, hopefully, what actually is beautiful.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the huge problem, Brian, is that I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but Republicans, we tend to, this is why we start think tanks.
Yeah.
And conservatives is because we're like, you know what, if we just had a few extra data points.
Yeah, we start think tanks, not film studios.
Yeah, exactly. So Dan, I want to ask you on the literature.
One more.
Yeah.
And when we make music, it's usually some absolutely cringeworthy, cheesy rap response to the Let's Go Brandon thing with boomers making it go viral. Like, we got a rap. Have you heard the rap song about Let's Go Brandon?
There was two of them.
It's so good. Oh, we stuck it to the libs. And I'm like, no, you need to write love songs that are beautiful and demonstrate the beauty of Christian marriage and child rearing. And you need to make films that do that. And you need to make, you need to paint paintings that do that. And you need to stop making cheesy knockoff counterfeit culture that is just all about the core argument, where there's this, thin veneer of plastic moralizing over a terrible story poorly presented.
Yeah, that's why we're contending not like 1950s, but 1650s.
1650s, baby.
1650s.
All the way back to 1650.
Yeah, let's build
architecture.
Towns.
Yes.
Let's build nations.
Chad based.
Right, let's get some Christian city fathers. I'm fired up, boys.
Fired up. So, Dan, what I was going to ask you, C.S. Lewis said that it's literature and stories that get past the watchful dragons of the heart. I just want to ask you, why is, as Brian's been expounding, why is that so important that we capture media, entertainment, art, literature for expanding what we're trying to present as the good life, which is Christendom? It's encompassed in covenantal Christendom.
That's right. Man, I love this question, Eric. This is such a good question. I know we were talking the other day about storytelling, and especially around like World War II. We were talking about D-Day recently and the invasion, and how stories are often told is kind of like, I'm going to download some information.
Yeah.
And this is what you're talking about with conservatives, is that so D-Day happened on June 6, 1944. At 4 a.m., the Allied forces assembled and blah, 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 blah. That's great. It tells you, it gives you information. That's not a story, though. What you're doing is you're giving historical data points.
Yeah.
What I want to know, and this is why stories are so powerful. Let me give you an example. So you have, to plug our other work, Wilderness Warrior.
Yeah, you can hear that D-Day story.
Yeah, you can hear the D-Day story, but it's a story of the man who was on the Higgins boat, which was a landing boat that had the door in the front of the boat that would drop down into a ramp, and the soldiers could run onto the shore.
Iconic boat of every photo and the thing
D-Day.
you're thinking
Yeah.
of with D-Day. Men coming off boats in
going
machine gun fire.
onto Normandy. Exactly. And so you're standing in this guy's shoes, okay, listening to the story. You're standing in this guy's shoes, hearing what he hears, smelling what he smells, the ocean spray. These guys had to take their helmets off to bail out the boats because the seas were rough. Some of the guys were chatting, like nervously chatting and laughing and joking. Some of the guys were really scared. The ships behind them lit up the skies. One guy said it was like the 4th of July, but like 1,000 4th of Julys. And the ocean was just on fire with all of the reflections of the explosions. And then the machine guns started. And so you're in this guy's shoes, and he's making the decision. He's getting shot at. The boat stops, and he has to drop the door.
Ordered to
drop the door. Drop the door. And he stops for a second and realizes that the machine gun bullets that are rattling off the metal ramp.
He can hear him hitting right in front of him.
Right in front of him. When he drops that ramp, they're not going to be bouncing off the ramp. They're going to be hitting him and his men. Mm-hmm. And why is that a powerful thing?
Yeah.
Is because you are experiencing something. Getting past the watchful dragons, you're standing in that man's shoes. It's no longer data points. That's lived experience.
Yeah.
That is something that stirs you.
Yeah.
Stories are so powerful in changing people and in winning your hearts.
Yeah, that's something that, Eugene Peterson had said. He said the point of a story like worship is to move you.
Yeah.
Like to physically, maybe, but otherwise just to move your soul so that you act and think and see the world differently.
Yeah, so if I want to win my boys to being courageous, godly men that will stand in the face of danger and sacrifice everything for the cause, am I going to say, boys, you need to be courageous and sacrifice anything for the cause?
Right.
No, you're going to say, there once was a knight. His name was St. George.
Yeah.
And there was a dragon. That's how I'm going to tell them
right.
the story. And that's why the liberals are winning. And to me, it's baffling because in a debate, you've seen debates before, presidential debates or whatever, you get the conservative up there and he's like, I'm going to, drop your taxes. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. We got to stop this. And then the Democrat gets up and says, oh, there's a young lady. Could you please stand up? And this young lady, she experienced oppression from her white supremacist employer. and you're like, this is all made up. I don't believe you for a second, but people do. They're winning because of stories. That's why stories are important, is because it's a lived experience. You're living with the people. They're alive in a way. And Jesus used them to win people and to drive people away.
And to shut mouths, to mystify. And, a lot of the time, conservatives try to tell stories sometimes. This kind of, impotent conservatism. It tries to tell stories, but it tells stories for the sake of data points. So it's like, oh, I need to convince people of this argument about economics. So I'll reverse engineer a very obvious moral tale to demonstrate this very obvious moral point.
And it comes off super ham-fisted.
It's so ham-fisted. And instead of that, what Christians should be doing is Christian, and I'm talking about real Christian conservatism here, we should recognize that the shape of reality is the story that we're aiming to tell is the true story. So it's not as if there are all of these competing fictions and whoever comes up with the best fiction wins. That's not the case. The liberal always has to tell a fiction. So what that means, this is actually profound. What it means is that Christians and conservatives, true conservatives, can actually just tell compelling stories about reality, and those will shape people towards the God of reality, to live with the grain of that reality.
Yeah, I know one thing that we've said before, and this kind of cheapens that beautiful statement that you just made, is that Christians have cheat codes.
Yeah, we have cheat codes.
Because why is that? Because we know the foundations of reality and truth. That's why this cuckold conservatism falls apart. In that list of 10 things, those 10 principles of conservatism, they all fall apart because they are not founded in reality. Yeah. They're founded in the ether somewhere, like I had said. And we as Christians actually know and are intimately aware of the great storyteller and how the world operates. We can look at a mountain, at a sunrise, at a courageous man, at a gloriously feminine woman, and we can tell a story about that liberals have to lie about because they actually don't know the truth and the foundations of reality in the cosmos.
It's why they have to tell superhero stories about ladies who can, who are really good at martial arts and can beat up men.
But those are your favorite?
Those are actually my favorite movies. As you guys know, if you listen to Meatscapades, if you're a patron, I love Marvel movies, and have Marvel tattoos. I think,
and your pajamas.
The Incredible Bulk and
that was my nickname in high school.
Man. Yeah. But Christians,
hey, that's one of the nicknames we don't have to cut from the episode.
Yeah, I love it. The editing room floor is sometimes littered with mistakes.
You guys have
everybody.
no idea.
But Christians, because of this, a Christian who makes it his life's goal to tell good stories, to write good books, to make good music. It's like Luther said, the Christian cobbler isn't a Christian cobbler by putting little crosses on the shoes that he makes. You don't have to make movies and film and art and music and whatnot that is explicitly, and that's a really bad category, but is about communicating some didactic, theological, parabolic sort of truth.
Yeah, like on a one-to-one.
Yeah. What you do is you tell beautiful stories about reality that demonstrates the beauty of virtue, of Christian virtue, and demonstrates the ugliness of sin in all of its ugliness. Even you can make films that are dark. You can make music that is dark and still be telling the truth, and you will still be discipling and shaping people and shaping their view of the world, such that when anybody reads Lord of the Rings, they are being shaped towards a Christian view of the world and reality, whether they know it or like it or not. What's funny is, in many ways, same thing's happening when you read Harry Potter by J.K. Rowling. She basically ripped off the entire plot of the 7th book from the Gospels and where death ends up killing death through self-sacrifice. It's like where the hero becomes sin and is killed by the serpent figure willingly and lays down his life like a sheep who is silent before the shearers, only to take his life up again, and death ends up killing itself. It's like these stories that are great, the reason they're actually great is because they're telling the truth. They're telling the true myth.
I think that's huge. And it gets to why I think Plato would say, you can have the politics, give me the storytellers.
That's right.
And I'll take it. So one of the things I want to transition to, some people may be listening and they say, okay, well, some on the right are doing a really good job with media. You might think of somebody like the Daily Wire and a lot of what's going on with conservatism in that camp. So I want to begin to unpack kind of where that movement has taken us. So we've got a variety of interesting forms along these lines. There's the brash locker room fart joking of Steven Crowder. Louder with Crowder. He's definitely on the louder emphasis there. We've got the angry Jewish AM talk show host. We've got Mark Levin. We've got Michael Savage. And then, of course, as we've talked about, we've got the much nerdier and much faster talking Ben Shapiro. Mm-hmm. Right? He argues with college students about transgenderism, and everybody gets riled up. Right? We've got Dave Rubin and his sodomy partner who kidnapped small children together.
Yeah.
All being celebrated by the folks at the Daily Wire.
Kidnapping's nicer than how I would have put it as human traffic.
That was actually,
Human
okay.
trafficking. Yeah.
Wow, there's actually a worse way of saying it. Good job,
I
Dan.
didn't actually know that. I tried to use the most biblical harsh words there, but
Bought the child, so.
that's actually true.
Whew.
We're making friends today,
Bring it
boys.
in.
That's right. That's right. So we've got Jeremy Boring making lewd shaving commercials.
Oh, horrible.
Because, Brian, honestly, I actually thought about this one. Dan and I were talking offline before the show about this. If you want to change the world and make it a better place, shaving.
Yeah, shaving with hose.
Shaving with hose. Now, see, I was actually thinking grow your beard, you effeminate man, who is, I mean, literally, it was just kind of a lewd video.
Yeah, it was horrible in every way.
These guys are sort of shock jocks. We've got other ones, though. This will be a popular comment. We've got Candace Owens and her, well, what is it that Candace Owens does so well? Well, she's black, and she's a woman. Was that a mic drop?
Social credit deducted.
Here's the thing, Eric. This is actually a great point, because what makes a lot of conservatives uncomfortable is often going to be those places in conservatism where it's actually liberal.
Yeah.
So one of the things that conservatives do, it's utterly gay, that makes me want to hit the clip in real time when I'm going through my life is,
You are gay.
Exactly. I see like conservatives set up these ladies to go fight our rhetorical battles. And we say, let's get Allie Beth Stuckey and let's get Candace Owens. And instead of saying, hey, go be a good mother and homemaker and Titus 2, be a worker at home and Proverbs 31. Instead, we're like, no, let's get the ladies to go out and fight our rhetorical battles and go fight women.
I mean, this is just a passing comment and probably not worth much. But I was watching Tucker Carlson online, a clip a while back. And the next recommended clip, I'm like, what is going on? I click on it. And it's like the normal Fox News show. I don't watch Fox News. I don't have TV. And there are like 5 ladies, and this is their normal program. And it's like models. They're like conservative, white, pretty models.
Yeah. Well, and they've done this for a long time. It's because old men like to watch young, pretty women talk.
Yeah.
Even if it's not intelligible. Feel free to jump in. Hey.
Wow.
I disagree. I don't think old men are perverts like that, Eric.
Oh.
And I think the ladies are really
do.
nice.
Yeah,
and they're
sure
smart.
you do. Sure you do, Dan.
Listen.
They're plenty smart. No, it doesn't have anything to do with their intelligence. It has to do with created order.
No, but
Yeah.
not even. I agree with you, created order. But like what my point is, we're championing people of conservatism, and then you look at the things that they're actually espousing. Forever, Megyn Kelly, champion of conservatism.
Oh, right.
And no, we should not be championing this. This is leftist, feminist, progressive statism.
Christendom Bible College offers a 1-year certificate in the humanities for students who intend to pursue a degree, or for students who prefer to begin their chosen occupations upon completion of our program. Older students who never attended college or who went to a college where the humanities were less robust will also find our program stimulating and suitable. Located steps from the Ohio River in the town of New Richmond, we're unaccredited in order to remain free to teach as our biblically minded consciences demand. As servants of Christ, we won't wear the yoke of the woke. Instead, we stand on the shoulders of Christianity's giants, not to stew in nostalgia, but to see through the culture war's fog to the glorious days of a Christendom still to be built. Our exceptional faculty are committed to the historic, biblical foundations of our faith. Come be a part of Christendom Bible College. Visit us on the web at christendombiblecollege.org to learn more. While there, be sure to sign up for our email updates and receive your free 3-chapter excerpt of our very own Dr. Frank J. Smith's new book, Race, Church, and Society.
No, what's funny is, you can, we've made this point maybe before, but Barack Obama in 2008 is running and campaigning on a platform position of no gay marriage. We don't want to overturn DOMA. Was that what it was? I can't remember. It was, but basically, maybe some civil unions, but but saying conservatives, I'm not trying to overturn gay marriage, and now there are conservatives who are actually running as conservatives who are like, no, gay marriage is fine. What we don't like is the trannies. And you're like, what is it going to be in 50 years? You're like, the trannies are fine. But you know what we're really against? We're really against amputating salamander legs onto, the hands of children to function as weird salamander fingers so they can do weird salamander sexy stuff. I don't even know what the transhumanism, is that going to be the next thing? What the heck?
I think the point is what R.L. Dabney was saying, that it's fundamentally conservatism. If all it is the shadow chasing the beast, it's just going to keep moving and you're going to keep missing the mark.
It's worthless because it's the conservatism of expediency only, and not of sturdy principle, as he said. So it's like, and again, even in the way the sturdy is important there, because sturdy principle means principle that's properly founded on the Christian worldview. So it's not mere principles then cut off, with their legs cut out from under them, pasted onto some Republican platform. Those principles are not true principles unless they're explicitly and overtly rooted in the godness of God, the identity of God as creator.
Well, and because
Christ.
The world is ruled by a covenantal God, that's how he's structured the cosmos. Dan?
Yeah, I actually want to read just an interview question and answer from the Daily Wire to really drive home Brian's point that this has to be founded on a Christian worldview, or else it's absolutely worthless. By the way, as a passing note, I think it's ironic that the Daily Wire, with their huge budgets, they're like, we're going to build something. We're going to build something enduring. We're going to build Chinese razors. That's going to be the legacy. It's not even like we have a new razor. We have a better razor. But anyway, that's beside the point. So what makes this difficult is that we have some co-belligerents, to steal from Brian's wording,
Who
in the
stole
Daily
it from
Wire.
Francis
They're
Schaeffer.
Oh, okay.
Right.
Well, either way. So we have some co-belligerents because we actually do align on so many issues, but fundamentally, the issue that I want to drive home is that it's not on a Christian worldview. So this is an interview with Ben Shapiro and Matt Walsh. Ben Shapiro is interviewing Matt Walsh. You guys might have seen this. Cross Politic did a coverage of this a little while back, but this was on March 31st, 2019. So Ben Shapiro asks Matt Walsh, you write a lot about politics. How do you separate out from talking about religion to talking about politics? When should you speak in a religious moral sense? And when should you speak in a secular sense when you make an argument? And so this is Matt's answer. I do not know that when it comes to these great moral arguments in our society, like abortion, marriage, and gender, that we have to be able to engage on these issues without throwing the Bible at people, especially if we're talking to people who don't believe the Bible. Because when you go the biblical route with someone that doesn't believe the Bible, you've just put an extra step in the way. Instead, you have to talk about these natural law issues, the fundamental moral truths, and also logic and reason. I always cringe when transgenderism is being discussed and someone brings up Genesis. You don't need to bring Genesis up. This is a very basic, fundamental, logical distinction. You have men here and you have women here. Men have penises, You should be able to explain that without quoting Genesis. And here's the irony. The very next question Ben Shapiro asks Matt Walsh, what is the biggest problem with the Christian church? And he says that secularism has invaded it.
I have two responses
my
to Matt Walsh, and here they are.
Award you no points, and may God have mercy on your soul.
I knew it.
Everyone in this room is now dumber.
Here's the thing. For Matt Walsh, and what he completely fails to understand is that why is he arbitrarily privileging logic as a layer that they have to submit to?
It's just Enlightenment thinking.
Yeah, why logic? What are you building your logic on? Where did logic come from? Why do they have to submit to it? Because right now the play is from the liberals is because they recognize that they're factually wrong. And so instead of coming up with arguments to get around the wrongness, they've actually just thrown out logic as a tool of white supremacy. So now they're like, if you make arguments from reason and logic, you're actually demonstrating their point that you are just an agent of white supremacy in their view.
Racist.
Well,
and the answer is, I'm not going to throw out logic or the Bible. That's the real answer.
And that's why it's so important to grasp this. Like you may have one guy arguing against masks and one guy arguing for them, but this is why presuppositions matter. Because if they're both operating on the fundamental presupposition that science is the ultimate magisterium of truth, then you already failed.
Yeah, you've already failed. And you've actually misunderstood what science is in the first place.
That's right.
Which is not an authority. It's a methodology to arrive at. It's a methodology to evaluate claims that can be evaluated through the domain of science, which is not all claims. Only claims that can be accessed through things like experimentation and observation can even be accessed by science in the first place. Science cannot be the arbiter or the magisterium of truth because it itself relies upon an entire, foundational world of other presuppositions that you can't even do science unless you have those.
Yeah, so I think you're absolutely right. And I think what we're driving at here is this kind of thinking, Dan, that you've shared with Matt Walsh. This is not going to rebuild anything. We're not going to see the rebuilding of American culture under this shadow chasing the beast of leftist thought. So I'm going to continue to unpack this, but I also want to cover some ground with some other conservatives. So Daily Wire is one. They're kind of on the forefront. They may be some of the best that we have in terms of media.
Yeah. I mean, What is a Woman? Matt Walsh's documentary is a fantastic piece of media. Not in changing anybody's mind, but in demonstrating the absurdity and the complete irascibility of the opponent. Like that, you can't win them through argumentation. He demonstrated that.
And so what I want to say is, I think with the Daily Wire, they're good at media production. Just sheerly looking at media production, they do a phenomenal job. They spend a lot of money. And then number two, I'm holding three fingers, but number two,
I love it.
Number two, I think it's their slogan: drink liberal tears.
Yeah.
You sign up for the Daily Wire, you get their cup. I have the cup. I drink liberal tears. Every morning I have coffee. Here's the problem, though. It's fundamentally a negative worldview, meaning your whole existence is, I want to see those idiots suffer.
It's reactionary.
Yeah, it's a reactionary thing. So we'll continue to unpack this. I want to look at some other people as well. There's kind of the old guard conservative. Brian, you mentioned Ann Coulter. She's been well known for eviscerating the insanity of the left, and again, famously predicted that on Bill Maher that Trump would win the presidency. She got laughed out of town. And of course, that clip got played a lot after he was elected.
Yeah, I bet.
We have the godfather of conservatism, Rush Limbaugh. Right? Yeah. He dominated, changed radio forever.
My dad was whatever the platinum, double, diamond, extra, silver subscriber was, that like where Rush actually followed you around and talked to you. That was my dad.
That was your dad. Yeah. A few pegs down from him, let's put Sean Hannity.
A lot of pegs down, but yeah, I agree.
Yeah, a lot of pegs down. And then we've got another Jew. We've got Dennis Prager, a PragerU. Maybe the poster boy of conservatism, Tucker Carlson. But here's the deal. I'm picking on Dennis Prager because I've watched so many videos with Dennis Prager.
Yeah.
And people are like, PragerU, yeah.
Oh, dude, PragerU.
PragerU is going to rebuild America. And then Dennis Prager is encouraging young people to have premarital sex to see if they're sexually compatible.
Dennis Prager. They're recommending Dennis Prager. Have you seen that Mexican interview? We need to get that on the clip where they're speaking Spanish and the guy's just like, and people put the like subtitles over it like, oh, they said Dennis Prager was a conservative. It's like Dennis Prager was also, if I'm not mistaken, in the comments of the trafficking tweet from whatever his bucket was in his gay lover, with the kids, with the womb hiring.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Prager was there
Yeah.
going, congratulations
Dave
on your
Rubin.
human trafficking.
Yeah. No, that's exactly right.
Total conservative.
So beyond these guys, we don't want to leave these guys out. We have the once, maybe, probably never conservatives like David French and David Brooks and Bill Kristol.
Yeah.
These guys barely even try to feign conservative doctrine anymore.
And Romney.
Yeah, Bill Kristol, again, I saw him on Twitter today. He's also a Jew, and he was on there saying, no, I'm just saying, that's what he is.
Eric, Dan and I, every time we share looks
Why
like,
do you gotta bring the
like
Jews into
Eric,
this?
Eric's been on Gab a lot lately, apparently.
So Bill Kristol is on Twitter explaining what an authentic Christian should be believing about politics.
Oh, but he's a Jew,
But he's a Jew, yeah.
All right.
So my point is, he's telling Christians how to live. He's not a Christian.
Oh, yeah.
So these guys are pretty open in their disdain for middle America. They said they were never Trumpers. Realistically, Brian, they were just never conservatives.
They were not. No, they were not conservatives.
Never
they were
have
a bunch of Jews, Eric.
Dan is losing.
I'm just kidding.
Man, I thought it would be something else other than the Jews that got us canceled.
Now I understand why you were saying that. Like, that they're not Christians, they're Jews. But it's, anyway.
You guys just have a funny bone for the Judaism question.
We do, because we always joke about it. We always joke about how, like, this is another example of how, like, conservatives lose, where they just, like, they collapse it all down to, like, some ethnic boogeyman, too, some, like, melanin issue where they're like, but the Jews control everything. And you're like, okay, sure. It's still going to come back to the principles of the thing. It's still going to come back to converting people to Christ, teaching them his lordship. Like, what made Western civilization great? It wasn't the whiteness of it. It was the Christianity, right? And so, anyway, I'm sorry. I'm probably making a bunch of people upset.
That's okay.
That's all right.
We forgive them anyway.
Yeah, we do.
So we have some other conservative voices, right, is the point here, who factor prominently today. And again, as I said, it's kind of been around this central thing of drinking liberal tears. You listen to Michael Savage. I kind of grew up as a teenager on this stuff.
Yeah.
Everybody's angry and they're peddling outrage.
Yeah.
That's fundamentally what happens.
Or the king.
Yeah.
Alex Jones.
Alex, are you trying to get us canceled?
When I
are you trying?
Today I saw a clip of him from like 4 years ago ranting. He's like, they're going to put aliens, they're going to dress up like space demons, they're going to have horns on their head, and you're going to put your children next to them, and they're going to be reading stories to them, and you're going to bring your kids there, and you're going to say it's okay. Oh! And they're like cutting in pictures of the demonic looking trannies or drag queens reading the stories.
Literal vampire pot-bellied goblins.
Bro was exactly right. Anyway.
Yeah, it's a little
so sorry,
it's a little
Ray,
scary.
For the sound that you have to deal with from that clip.
Might have to adjust some levels there, but it's absolutely true. A lot of those things have come to pass. So I think
this podcast has taken a turn that I did not expect.
It's one of our best.
It's taken a turn for the best.
It's one of our best, for sure.
Really is. Brian's headphones even kind of came off with his ranting.
My ears actually blown out on one side from music production, so I have to like take it off occasionally because it hurts.
I love it.
Especially when people are yelling into the microphone for absolutely no reason.
Who would do that?
Who would do
Alex
that?
Jones.
You
Dude,
have
Alex
to
Jones,
unleash
the
your
king
inner-
of rage.
That's right.
And being right unpopularly.
Unpopularly, the frogs.
Yeah.
Never forget the frogs.
NTFA.
So a lot of these guys, very good at identifying some of the problems, pointing out how stupid people on the left are. They're absolutely right on this. But here's the ultimate.
Which is like being good at the times tables. It's not that impressive. Anyway,
yeah, especially now. There's so much absurdity.
Yeah.
That it's like such a target-rich
It's like
environment.
knowing what the color red is instead of blue. Like, that's how difficult it is.
Right. And the point we're making is that's not enough. So here's the ultimate argument I want to make from this episode in this show. We've talked about conservatives.
Yeah.
We're finally getting down to a definition.
Okay. Yeah.
We're talking about conservatism.
Yeah.
But now we're going to talk about conservatism.
Yeah. So
I actually read this from Michael Cernovich. It's in a book by Vox Day.
Okay.
So he's got the forward. It's called Conservatism or something like this. Anyway, this is the claim Cernovich makes, and I think it's right. Dan, I want to get your take on this. He said that 99% of the conservative establishment today is conservative, and I'm going to define that.
Yeah.
So we know what we're talking about. The term cuck comes from an older word, cuckold, which refers to the cuckoo bird. It was the practice that cuckoo birds had where one bird would lay its egg in another bird's nest and could trick the other male bird into raising that chick as its own. In the human world, a cuck is a man who is tricked by an adulterous wife into raising another man's child. Now, it can also, if you check out Urban Dictionary, maybe don't do that if you don't want to.
0 out of 10 wouldn't recommend.
0 out of 10. Can also refer to something that is associated with another Jew, Jack Murphy. I'm sorry, he actually is, though.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay, in the manosphere, fake manosphere guru.
Yeah.
Wait, when you say he's actually a Jew, what does that mean, Eric?
Well, you guys are like thinking I'm like on Gab all the time.
You just mean he's actually Jewish. It's factual.
It's factual. His last name's like Goldstein. He's Jewish.
And don't look him.
Okay. I thought you meant like not just in spirit only.
Friends,
which I was wondering.
Don't look up. Just don't look up Jack Murphy, because the dude, he was one of these fake manosphere gurus that turned out to be a total fraud and an actually gross individual.
Yeah, just terrible, terrible stuff.
Yeah.
So, as we're talking about politically, a conservative is a false conservative who is thrilled to raise the bastard children of leftist progressive ideology. This is, in fact, what many conservatives today are doing. They pretend not to do it, but that is what they are doing. Most of what passes for conservatism today is merely, quote, not as bad as the left, though it has embraced many of the same basic assumptions and presuppositions about the world. We've mentioned a few things. One would be Dennis Prager, and then again, the Daily Wire crowd, which has celebrated sodomy, kidnapping, Dave Rubin, etc. So here's the point, and then I'm going to kick it over to Dan. Ultimately, this is it. They have not conserved anything, and they're not really building anything worth fighting for. They fuel outrage among Middle America, sure, because Middle America is quite honestly fed up with the swamp. Mm-hmm. And we have swamp.
And there's a lot of money to be made.
A lot of money to be made.
Rage clicks.
Just by the rage clicks. But they don't build anything. They don't have a positive vision for culture. And they most certainly do not have a positive vision for Christendom. Dan, I want to get your hottest of hot takes.
Yeah, so here's my hot take. Okay, it actually might not be that hot, but it is a little spicy. So in some ways, I think that these conservatives, the cuck-servatives, are even worse than liberals because they're lying. They're lying to themselves. And the name with the cuckoo bird, is that right?
Cuckoo.
Is so fitting because who is having the children? Who has the families?
We do.
Who are the ones that are abandoning their children to be discipled by the leftists?
It's totally
Who are the ones that are sending their wives into wage slavery?
Yeah.
Cuck-servatives.
Cuck-servatives are doing that.
Yeah.
And you know, I think the reason that these guys are really attractive to younger men, because that's who they're so attractive to younger men, owning liberal tiers. They see someone that's fighting, somebody that's really aggressive, see someone that has some sort of facade, at least, of masculinity. And what it really does is it exposes the father hunger of the bastard generation. Michael Foster talks about this a lot.
Yeah.
But the bastard generation. And so these guys are just absolutely worshipped. But the fruit that they're producing is terrible because they're abandoning their kids to the liberals and sending their wives off to be wage slaves to build another man's house.
I think you're absolutely right. And look, a lot of these guys, you look at them, it's like Dave Rubin. Is that somebody that you want your son to grow up and be like? Absolutely not. You look at many of them, it's like they don't have kids, they're unmarried. I think when you look at it, Michael Foster's absolutely right here. There's a father hunger, but these guys are functional Absaloms.
Yeah.
They're going and stealing the hearts of the children and those who are desperate to have father figures in their lives. They're desperate to see somebody fight because let's be honest, I don't want to just knock the boomer generation, but from my experience watching it, it is painful as a son to watch your world be given away by an older generation of men who are flat out cowards and compromisers.
They will risk nothing serious.
They will risk nothing serious.
They want to live in a neutral world where they can be comfortable with their piles of stocks, nobody attacking them. And they are either willfully or ignorantly misreading the world that they live in. And so building no walls, putting up no protection, and sending their children not just to be raised by the enemy and become, but to be devoured by the enemy.
And a lot of these guys are they're just mimicking these talk show hosts, these talking heads, because their sins are so effeminate. They're just a bunch of whiny babies. They just complain. That's not exactly the word I wanted to use, but we've had complaints about cursing. So they just complain, sit around like a bunch of old women and just they're catty and they just have stuff to complain about.
You're talking about a lot of this conservative movement.
The conservative movement, so the talking heads, all the guys that you had mentioned, the whole their whole platforms are just on complaining.
Well,
and then you have, the boomer generation that's watching them, and they just complain.
That's sort of the thing with like the whole Fox News phenomenon. So I grew up in homes where there was always older people watching Fox News. And it always struck me because it's like, yeah, you want to sit here and whine about the way the world is. But first of all, don't say it's those kids out there. It's your kids.
Right.
And second of all, it's like, but you're not doing anything. And functionally, what we've said in this show is we want to have a positive vision of culture to build. We don't just want to complain about the way things are. It brings me back, Brian, to a quote from G.K. Chesterton. He said, "The true soldier fights not because he hates what is in front of him, but because he loves what is behind him."
Yeah.
And one of the problems I have with the whole Daily Wire, drink liberal tears, conservative movement today, it's functionally hating what's in front of you. And as it turns out, there's actually nothing behind them.
Yeah.
Nothing worth fighting for. Agree,
that's
disagree?
So true. That is at the heart of the problem. At the heart of the problem is, and it comes back to this positive vision. Are you trying to win the world for Christ and his crown and his kingdom? Or are you trying to do something else? Because if you're trying to do something else, whatever that something else is, it will always be conquered by some god and his program of conquest. So, if you don't have, if you're a generation that has a lot of comfort, for example, like we've seen with baby boomer generation coming out of World War II, you have a lot of comfort. You have the bubble of everything going up through stocks and money printing happening and having its effect. It's like a temporary high because everything seems to be great, and it's just so easy to get lulled into this idea of reducing things down to mere limited government or mere economic policy or mere what is the Fed doing? Oh, I want my stocks to keep going up so they can have enough money to just do my thing. And instead of what is this all for? What are my kids for? What am I for? What's my strength for? What are my days for? What is it actually all for? And if you don't answer that question, well, it's for the sake of Christ and his kingdom. If you answer it in any other way, you are in the process of being conquered and colonized by another god. And you're leaving your children defenseless because you're letting that God come and tear down the walls of the previous generations put up in the service of Christ and his kingdom.
Yeah, that's a phenomenal point. So, Dan, I want to ask you, what do we do about this, right? Should we never listen to Ben Shapiro? Should we just totally ignore conservative voices? Maybe part of the answer here is even a lot of the church, we look to Tucker Carlson. He's one of the better voices, I think.
Yeah, I did want to mention that not everybody is terrible.
No, Steve Deace doing great work.
Yeah.
There's a handful of guys who are pretty solid, but I guess my question is, and maybe my thought, maybe I'll just tell you what I'm thinking.
Yeah, just tell me what you think.
As I'm processing through this.
Yeah.
I think the problem is the church has adopted this pietistic, anti-political theology where we just say we don't get involved in that sphere. And so the church is hungry and desperate for something insightful and meaningful spoken to them so that they can understand what's going on in the world. And the only people willing to give it are the Tucker Carlsons of the world. Through the last 2 years, even I would listen to Tucker because I was like, there's one guy right now who is bold enough to speak the truth about what's going on, and you weren't getting it from the pulpits. So if anything, I think for the American church, this should be, it's not that we should just be bitter. There are a lot of guys who are like, well, I've been saying what Jordan Peterson said for a long time. Well, clearly not, probably.
Yeah.
So we're not saying this because we're jealous of these guys.
Maybe you're not getting the attention because he's a better man.
Or he's a better communicator, or he's got a better message.
That's what I mean.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
not a more moral man. I mean better skilled.
Practically, what are the takeaways for the church and for us and for the work we're doing at King's Hall? What do you take away from the conservative movement? What do we do with that practically?
Yeah, number one, we play to win. We play for keeps. We play for totalizing worldview. We play to win and provide a positive vision for human life and every part of what it means to be human under the kingship and rule of Christ and his lordship. Everything we do is for that and defined by that. And you can't start with any other foundation, or all you will be doing is, again, being the shadow that follows radicalism to perdition.
Yeah, that's really good. Yeah, I'm going to say the same thing Brian said, but in my own way, which is we talked about this again in Wilderness Warrior, but the idea of courage and of fighting is really attractive, especially to younger guys who are zealous. They want something to fight for. And the conservative movement, especially with the media, amounts to a lot of saber rattling. You know, I've explained it like you have the two armies that are lined up. They're going to go to battle, and these conservative media guys are like, you know, marching out there, and they like moon the enemy, and everybody like, yeah, cheers, and they go back. But there's never actually any fighting.
Yeah.
Or to use a different metaphor, there's actually no building. And it's because there is no positive message. It is just a negative message. So the important thing is not just like we need to be courageous. We need to stand up. We need to fight. You know, we need to do that. But you have to have a positive vision, a mission. I exist to accomplish this. I exist to build this. And it should be a thing that you would be willing to give everything for Christendom.
Yeah.
To see the gospel go out, to see people saved and redeemed and discipled and changed, sanctified and glorified, to one day. One thing we talked in after hours, if you wanted to listen to that, you got to be a patron, is the desire to have a cemetery here.
Yeah.
Because we have a sense of place. We have people we love. We are building here. We've burned the boats. We're here in Ogden, Utah. We want to be buried here. We want to be buried here together so that when Christ comes, we are going to be amongst the first resurrected saints in Utah, in the new world, in this new world that Christ builds and, you know, comes back to.
Yeah.
And so that's the vision. That's what's pushing forward. So you have to have that thing that you're fighting for that's behind you, not just the enemy in front of you.
Yeah, and as you're thinking about this, don't just get focused on the polemics. Don't get just focused on the arguments and the politics and the current events and even the theology. What you need to go do is you need to do what the church has failed to tell young men and women to do and be for a long, long time, and that is to go be a glory. Like, men, go and be a glory. Go put your hand to whatever it is that the Lord has given you to do and do it with excellence. Do it with all your might. Put your back into it, because we're not going to build Christendom on talking heads. Christendom is going to be built by men and women with families to feed. It's going to be built by men and women who are starting businesses,
taking risks,
who are feeding people, who are feeding people's souls with art and media and even entertainment, who are building good homes for people to live in the construction industry, who are solving people's real problems in the economy and, you know, employing people. It's going to be built by women who put their back into the arts and disciplines of homemaking and recover the lost arts and disciplines of homemaking in the productive Christian household. It's going to be built by Christians who do education really well. And my point is, it's not going to be built by just talking about the left. That's not going to do it.
Yeah, and I think what that fundamentally means is, even for us, we have to be men who are not just talking about it, but
that's right.
You could look at our lives and say, yeah, no, they've actually built households and churches and communities and businesses.
Yeah, or may we close our mouths?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think it's a great place for us to end today's episode, gentlemen. It's been a pleasure. Brian, we're going to close by talking about Reformation Heritage Books.
Yeah, Reformation Heritage Books, one of our sponsors for this season, heritagebooks.org, or the link in the show notes is the place to go. And as we've been telling you through this season, a lot of the issue that we're going to need to get right is the resourcing of the Reformation, where we're looking back through the rich heritage that we've received from our spiritual forefathers. And a lot of that looks like words that are printed on paper in books. I was just looking, for example, at heritagebooks.org and their sexuality sale. They've got some titles under there with Joel Beakey, Carl Trueman, that are some great books, some of them that we've even referenced in this season, that you can pick up there and support a Christian publisher. You can get the Family Worship Bible Guide. It's got its own tab under the categories there, and that will help you to lead your family men in family worship. It has devotional thoughts on all 1,189 chapters of the Bible And again, we've got to get these things right from the foundation, and that means being not just lords and glory bearers, but also being sages who understand and rightly divide the word. So head to heritagebooks.org, link in the description as well, and get a book, read it, chew your food, do the work that it tells you to do, and don't just be a hearer only, but be a doer as well. And we believe the Lord will bless you richly in that. So thanks for listening to this episode of the King's Hall podcast. And we want to remind you that all the work we're talking about here is not going to be accomplished in 10 minutes, but Festina Lente, make haste slowly as you go about it. And also, hey guys, we'd love to see you join us on Patreon. Patreon.com, where we have a link in the description as well. You can get access to a weekly after-hours show that only comes to the patrons there. And we laugh, we cry. It's a great time. We'll see you next week.